The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. Lovin' baseball when we were 12 and innocent. My guest is the daughter of the iconic baseball player and manager, Gil Hodges. I'd like to welcome back to the network, Irene Hodges. How are you, Irene?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope you're well.
I am indeed, and I really looked forward to this for a long time. I'd like to get to know you better, and the best way to do it is to find out what it was like for you being a baseball fan at age 12. Because my philosophy is, in doing this, is that intellect meets enthusiasm for a baseball fan. And I know from talking to you in the past that enthusiasm was never a problem. Age 12, you were 1963, and your dad had moved out to, sadly, this is one of the saddest things going, is that the Dodgers and my Giants as well moved from New York, from Brooklyn and New York City, simultaneously in 1957, and 1963, age 12, what are your memories of baseball, of being around the Dodgers, of having Dodgers siblings as friends, because they were an incredibly close-knit team. And I'll let you take it, Irene. What was it like?
Okay. It was actually a very normal childhood for all of us. You know, we knew our fathers. That was their job. We played with each other. We went to school. I mean, when my dad moved to California, we went to school there like we did every day. There was nothing exceptional until I really got older. And when my dad was back in New York, but when my father was with the Dodgers, preferably the Brooklyn Dodgers, it was family. They were our family. They were our friends. They'd come for dinner. We played with their kids. It was just like any other group of men at work. You know, we were just very fortunate that they were so close.
Which Dodger siblings did you play with, befriend, enjoy?
We were friends with Jackie's children, Carl's children. I think those, maybe Campy's children as well.
Okay.
I think those were the most we're close with.
What do you remember about their dads most? Start with Carl Furillo, because even though I was a Giant fan, I rooted for two Brooklyn Dodgers without question. One of them was Scoonge Carl Furillo, and the other one was Junior Gillingham. Yeah. Tell me about Carl Furillo from a kid standpoint. What was he like?
Well, my mother, as you probably know, is Italian and from Brooklyn. Carl, being Italian, he was definitely like family. My grandmother would cook for him, especially during spring training, because my grandparents came with us during spring training, and he was always over eating with us, and his boys were good friends as we grew up. So he was very close with my family. I think the fact that both being Italian played a big part of that.
I didn't realize that, and that's wonderful. He got a good meal at your grandmother's.
Always. She was a tremendous, tremendous cook, and he loved it. It was like home.
Your dad wasn't Italian.
No.
What was it like for him joining an Italian family or becoming part of an Italian family?
It was probably a cultural shock, for sure. My dad, Indiana, Midwest, quiet. My mother was an Italian from Brooklyn, not quiet. So I'm sure it was an adjustment for my dad and for my mom as well. But they got through it.
Did they meet after your dad was a Dodger?
My mother used to work in a department store called A&S in Brooklyn. And her friend, I believe her name was Peggy, lived in a boarding house in Brooklyn. And she knew, my mother loved the Dodgers long before she knew my father. She'd skip school, go to the Dodger games. She'd walk in parades for them. She had, way before she knew my dad. And Peggy said to my mother, "Why don't you come for dinner? A couple of the guys will be there, and you love the Dodgers, and you'll get to meet them." I believe my father's roommate was Eddie Mixis. And
I remember him, an infielder.
Okay.
Limited ability.
Rooming house where Peggy lived. And my mother went to dinner one night, and they came up for dinner, and that's how my mother met my dad.
Wow. Was it love at first sight?
I think so. I think to a degree. My father, as I said, was Midwest, and living in Brooklyn was an adjustment for him, but he loved the people of Brooklyn. He absolutely loved them, and they loved him. So I think it was definitely an early attraction that definitely grew into love.
To say that the Brooklyn fans and Brooklyn people of all kinds, you didn't have to be a fanatic. There was something about the Brooklyn Dodgers that drew people to each other. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you, is there any city in the United States, any team that would have accepted Jackie as readily as Brooklyn did?
Without a doubt, no. And I think they knew that. And I think the team accepted him with open arms, and that was the first important hill to climb. There was no problem on the team. And, they loved Jackie, and Jackie loved them and was endeared to them. I can remember stories. I was young, of course. My mom would go to the ball game, and horrible things would be said about Jackie in the stands. Just horrible, horrible things.
In Brooklyn.
And
in Brooklyn. This wasn't away games in Philadelphia.
It took time. It wasn't overnight, but very, very shortly after they learned about him and saw what he was capable of, they loved Jackie. They absolutely loved Jackie.
Wow.
So did his team, and so did his team.
his teammates, some of whom sent a petition not wanting to play with him when he was first signed. There was one fellow who really adjusted his life's ideology, and that was Bobby Breakin, who went on to mentor Maury Wills when he was in the minors.
Right.
And did you know the Breakins at all?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Well, I find that to be very interesting, how Jackie changed the world sociologically, I should say. And anything about Jackie Robinson that the public, he's been so well storied about. Peter Golenbach wrote a book on bums and wrote a book called Bums, and interviewed his wife extensively in that book, and it told the world what he went through. What was he like that we don't know about?
He was a gentleman, and you would never know that because he had to be tough out there. You know, he had to take what he had to take, but he also had to stand up for himself. And they knew that part of Jackie. You know, it wasn't always easy to take that, you know, to take that ridicule and that resentment. It wasn't. And, you know, Brooklyn was one thing, but they traveled all over. In spring training, they weren't allowed in the stores. I mean, my mom used to go shopping for them. I mean, this is hard to believe, but in Florida, in those years, they weren't allowed in the stores.
In these years, it's not all that great in Florida, let alone back then.
It was very, very difficult back then for them. And they,
what was it like for you?
Going to come with it.
Pardon me?
They knew when he signed and when he started playing, they knew to a degree what they were going to face.
Right. To a degree. Were they surprised, though, how bad it really was?
I think it was very hurtful. I think the hurt was worse than anything. You know, to treat any human being the way they were treated is just horrific. You know, so sad. Such good people, such a lovely, lovely family, and you know, just so non-accepting of him.
Jackie, am I right about this? Jackie internalized the hurt, and I think it led to his early demise.
Well, I know he internalized some of it, not all of it, but definitely a good part of it. But he had a team that really, I mean, Pee Wee Reese, Midwest, my dad, Midwest, I mean, adored Jackie. I know the story of somebody once throwing a bottle at Jackie on the field. And my dad saying to him, Jackie, you better move over. They're looking for me. You know, just to try light of the moment.
Right.
But very sad.
I'll ask you the same question that I asked you about Jackie. I'll ask you about your dad. What don't we know about him on a personal level? What kind of a guy was he?
He was a very strong individual, tremendous faith in his religion. very respectful of people, demanded a lot, but gave a lot. Growing up, you were never allowed to even curse in my house. Never. I mean, that wouldn't be tolerated. He was very honest. You could never lie. You know, he had certain values that he lived by, and he demanded that of his children as well and his family. But he had a great sense of humor, loved to play cards, just a good human being, separate from baseball, just the man himself. A tremendous man, you know, a tremendous individual for sure.
Wow, that's very well said and from the heart. And, I love hearing it because he's what we picture. What you see was what you got. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. There was no pretense about him. He'd walk to the stores. He was just like every man. You know, my friends came to the house. It wasn't like coming to Gil Hodges' house. It was coming to our family house. There was no specialty in our home. Not at all.
Right. How did he and the family adjust to the move to Los Angeles?
It was a difficult move. My mother was brokenhearted. She had never been that far away from her parents. So the first trip, my mother never unpacked. I mean, we lived out of trunks because she just couldn't bear being so far away. The Dodgers.
So it was like a road trip.
Yeah, just a long one, but
just a long one, long indeed.
Yeah, but it was the same team. That's what made it okay. You know, it wasn't that my dad was traded or anybody was traded. The whole team was the same group of men. They played in Brooklyn and played in LA. But it was
even the uniforms were identical.
Yes.
Except for the B on the caps. You couldn't tell from year to year that they had moved to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Walter O'Malley and your dad. What was the relationship?
My dad is the type of individual that had a tremendous amount of respect for the people that he worked for. Fortunately, he liked Walter. And to this day, his daughter, Terry, and his son, while my mother was alive, were in contact with my mother. I saw Terry in California in the past year. He wrote beautiful letters to my mom, And I can tell you when my dad was coming back to New York to play for the Mets, my mother called Walter and said, "You can't do this to my husband. My husband has to finish his career as a Dodger, not as a Met." It was a brand new team. I mean, nobody knew them. And he said to my mother, Joan, he needs to end his career in Brooklyn. That's where he belongs. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And then he came back when they had the expansion, and he came back to New York for a very short time as a player, but that's what he did. And that's where he ended his playing career.
And then he became the Washington Senators manager before becoming a Met manager.
Yes.
What was that like for the family? A new place, a new road trip, if you will.
Well, we never moved to Washington. We would go, because it was so close, it was only 4 hours driving. We would go when we had vacations, or we go every summer we would go. But we never moved to Washington. And my dad, naturally was only there 2 years before he came back to New York.
Now, he played with the Mets. Did he enjoy his time under Casey Stengel?
He loved
Other
Casey.
than his,
Had a lot of
he was
respect
hurt.
for Casey, but he was hurt. He played very little. He knew he had bad knees. He had knee surgery. He knew that his playing days were really over. But he had a lot of respect for Casey.
Okay. What made him a good manager let's talk about the Mets, because Washington was like a blip on the entire thing. But what made him a particularly good manager? And he was.
Oh, he's a great manager. It could be the first inning, and he was already thinking about the fifth or sixth inning. He was so smart. He could take a play and look at it and know where it was going to go. He would be able to use his players, knew what they were capable of, knew what he could get from them. He was just very, very smart and knew the game inside out. I think nobody said it better than Tug McGraw, who said most people play checkers. Gil always played chess. And that's just the way he was. He was way on top of things all the time.
Wow. Tug McGraw played a big part in the Mets' early on success. Early on, they weren't successful, but quickly they were. George Weiss was responsible for that early on. He built the farm system, and a lot of the people like Cleon Jones and Tug McGraw benefited because Weiss built. Did your dad have a relationship with Weiss at all?
Yes, he did. As I said, he had a lot of respect for people that he worked for, and I'm sure he did for Mr. Weiss as well. I mean, Johnny Murphy was great and instrumental. Bill Shea, I mean, they were all instrumental in the Mets.
Yes, the names you mentioned, John. Relief pitcher with the Yankees early on, and was big in the front office. I'm going to ask you one more question about the and who was responsible for building that team, the '69 champions. Did your dad communicate with Whitey Herzog at all?
He did. I know Whitey. Whitey was a very, very smart baseball man. He did, but my dad was the type that, I mean, he would speak to everyone. He would get their input, but the final decision as manager would always be his.
Okay.
He himself. He knew what he wanted, and he went out and got it.
Okay. Any stories about Casey that come to mind?
only a funny story, but it really isn't a baseball story. He used to, in spring training, he would have the room for some reason next door to my dad. And when I would knock on my father's door, for him to come open the door, Casey would always open his door. I'm here for my dad. He said, well, okay, but I thought I'd say hello every single time. It was hysterical. But he was a sweetheart. He really was.
And the last thing I want to ask you, did your dad have regrets?
As far as?
So far as anything baseball-wise, it could have gone a lot of things could have happened differently. Was he satisfied with the way? He went out a hero,
yeah.
But he's satisfied with the way things turned out.
I think so. I think he had a team that he believed in. He along with them, turned their image around, because their image as jokers, as clowns, would never be accepted by my father. That would never happen in a million years. So I think before he got there, there was one way fans thought of the Mets. But when he got there, he made sure that changed. And he made sure they believed in themselves. That was the most important part. It may have been a joke for you, but it's not a joke anymore. And I don't think he was a man with regrets. No, I don't. I think he saw something, he worked, and he instilled that in every player under him.
He got the best out of them, in other words.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for them, they benefited so much from everything he taught them, and he made them believe in themselves.
Well, when I was 4 and a half in 1951, I went to the Polo Grounds with my dad, with my grandfather. But he made sure, because my Aunt Sonny lived on Bedford Avenue and overlooked the ball, Ebbets Field. He made sure I had exposure to all the teams. Went to Yankee Stadium, saw Joe DiMaggio and what have you. I don't regret growing up a Giants fan.
Okay.
I must say that I am now, in my later years, a Giant fan, a Mets fan, a Dodger fan, and a Yankee fan. Yankees of those days, primarily. Because the memories, without each team, it wouldn't have been the same. In other words, the Dodger rival, without the Giants, they wouldn't have gone down in history like they did, because competition is everything. And so that's as close as I'm going to tell you that I didn't buy a Dodger cap yet, but I might in your honor.
Thank you. I never bought a Giant cap either.
I don't blame you. But Irene, this has been so cool for me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for your company. Thank you for being, and thank you for passing on memories that are priceless.
My pleasure. And I have regards for you from Ian, who is a dear friend of mine. And I told him I was going to be on your podcast today. And he said, make sure you tell Ralphie I love him. I said, okay, I will.
Oh, wow. Who is that?
Ian Karanowitz.
Ian is a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
He has done many podcasts on my network.
Yep.
And we are so different and yet so the same. Started out as New York Jews,
yep.
And he took a different path. And if not for Ian, I would be a less tolerant human being.
Okay.
And so when you talk to him, tell him I love him. And
I will.
Irene, I love you too.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Good. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Irene Hodges, the guest. I'm thrilled. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you,
Ralph. For listening, everyone. Irene, I'll send you a link to this within 2 hours, and you can pass it on to Ian and all the people that this would be important to know that you had this interview.
Absolutely.
Sorry I wasn't more smooth at the end, but I'm a little today. You make me nervous, Irene.
I'm the one that should be nervous, not you. But thank you. It was fine.
Oh, if you were nervous, you didn't show it at all. But
Good.
Then again, you weren't talking to a Hodges like I was, and so there you go. Thank you again for listening, everybody. Great podcast. Good night, Irene.
Thank you.
All right. I always wanted to say that from the song. Did you ever get teased about that? Good night, Irene. She's gone. Thank God she doesn't have to listen to my rambling anymore. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph C. Tycho, the weak link of it all. Adios and happy trails.